Mrs. Crow had always believed that poverty had a distinctive smell, the sour stench of cheap desperation that no amount of expensive perfume could ever conceal. At St. Augustus Private Academy, where the tuition for a single term was enough to buy a small apartment in the suburbs, she saw herself as a gatekeeper, the final filter ensuring the purity of the upper class. With 20 years of seniority teaching, art, Mrs. Crow ruled this classroom like a queen without a throne. She lightly tapped her velvet-wrapped ruler against the blackboard, the dry sound instantly silencing the room, then lifted her left hand to smooth a carefully curled lock of hair. On her ring finger, a 3-carat diamond ring, her constant companion and the greatest pride of her life, flashed a cold glint under the ceiling lights. "Today we will be learning about ceramics," Mrs. Crow said, her voice lilting with condescension. "Art is refinement. It is class. It is not for the coarse." Her eyes swept across the classroom, gliding over the children of tycoons dressed in custom-tailored uniforms, and then her gaze stopped. The polite smile on her lips vanished. In the corner of the room, Ruby, the only scholarship student in the class, was sitting upright. But today, Ruby was not wearing her usual worn uniform. She was dressed in a beautiful emerald blue princess dress. Mrs. Crow narrowed her eyes. She stepped down from the podium, the sharp clicks of her high heels striking the wooden floor like a judge's gavel. She stopped directly in front of Ruby's desk. "Ruby," she began, her voice sweet but laced with thorns, "could you explain to the class why you are dressed like this? This is a classroom, not a gala." Ruby looked up, her dark eyes meeting her teacher's directly, without the slightest trace of the fear usually seen in disadvantaged children. "Today is my birthday, ma'am," Ruby replied, her voice strangely calm. "My father gave me this dress. School policy allows students to wear their own clothes on their birthdays." Mrs. Crow let out a short, scornful laugh. She bent down and reached out to touch the edge of the sleeve. The cool, silky softness of the finest silk made her jerk her hand back as if burned. She knew this material. It was expensive. Very expensive. Even more expensive than the suit she was wearing. In Mrs. Crow's mind, a vicious calculation immediately formed. Who was Ruby's father? An electrician named David. A man perpetually smeared with grease and dust. How could an electrician afford silk like this? "Your father," Mrs. Crow repeated, deliberately drawing out the words. "Your father bought it. With what money? Winning the lottery, or picking it up somewhere?" The class began to giggle. Ruby remained perfectly still, her hands resting lightly on her lap, her voice unwavering. "My father saved up, ma'am. This is a gift from him." "Saved up," Mrs. Crow echoed, her eyes boring into the dress as if she wanted to tear it apart. Envy began to seep into her like poison. A working-class child daring to sit here, shining brighter than the aristocratic children she worked so hard to flatter? That dress was an insult. It was an anomaly, something that did not belong here. Was Dade? "I certainly hope so." She straightened up, brushing her hands as if she had touched something filthy. "But Ruby, I must warn you. Things that sparkle but do not belong to you often bring trouble. Don't let me discover any questionable origins." Ruby did not respond, only blinked softly. That dignified silence only infuriated Mrs. Crow further. She felt her authority being challenged by the calmness of a 10-year-old child. Mrs. Crow spun around and strode back to her desk. She needed to reassert her dominance. The ceramics lesson was about to begin, and she could not risk getting clay on her treasure. Slowly, she removed the 3-carat diamond ring from her finger. The movement was deliberate and theatrical, ensuring that every pair of eyes in the room was fixed on the glittering stone. She placed the ring firmly on the dark wooden desk, right beside the flower vase. "Everyone listen carefully," Mrs. Crow announced loudly, casting a sideways glance toward the corner where Ruby sat. "Today we will be working with clay. I don't want anyone distracted. And especially—" She paused, pointing straight at the ring lying exposed on the desk. "No one is to come near the teacher's desk. This ring is worth more than the entire fortune of some people in this room. Don't let greed cloud your judgment, understood?" "Yes, Mrs. Crow." The students replied in unison, all except Ruby. She remained seated, gently smoothing the emerald silk, her eyes fixed on Mrs. Crow as if seeing through a clumsy performance. "Mrs. Crow snorted coldly and turned toward the sink in the corner of the room to prepare the clay, leaving the ring sitting openly on the desk like a tempting piece of bait. She did not know that her blind arrogance and narrow prejudice were about to push her into an inescapable trap, a trap already set, right beneath that soft layer of silk. The bell signaling the end of class rang, bringing with it the familiar noisy chaos of children freed from discipline. Chairs scraped, books thudded together. Mrs. Crow stood up, brushed the clay dust from her apron, and leisurely walked toward the sink in the corner. She turned on the faucet, letting the cool water run over her carefully manicured fingers. Her mind drifted to lunch, a salmon salad at her favorite French restaurant. She reached for a paper towel, drying her hands slowly, savoring the feeling of absolute cleanliness. But when she turned back to retrieve her treasure, time seemed to freeze. The teacher's desk was bare. The 3-carat diamond ring, which only minutes earlier had lain there, proud and glittering under the lights, had vanished without a trace. Mrs. Crow blinked once, then twice. She did not bend down to check under the desk. She did not rummage through the papers. She never once considered that it might have fallen. In her prejudice-filled mind, there was only one scenario: it had been stolen. And she knew exactly who the culprit was. Without saying a word, Mrs. Crow strode quickly to the main door. Click. The sound of the lock snapping shut was dry and sharp, like the cocking of a gun. The once noisy classroom fell silent. Smiles vanished. The wealthy children stared at one another in confusion, not yet understanding what was happening. Mrs. Crow did not stop there. She went to the window and yanked the cord. The heavy curtains slammed shut, blocking out the bright sunlight and turning the room into a sealed, suffocating, dark box. "Everyone back to your seats," she ordered, her voice stripped of its fake lilt and now low, harsh, and threatening. Immediately. The children obeyed in fear. The air in the room grew thick. Mrs. Crow climbed onto the podium, slammed both hands onto the desk, and swept her razor-sharp gaze across every face before stopping at the corner of the room, where Ruby sat in silence. "It seems," Mrs. Crow began, her voice hissing through clenched teeth, "that our class has someone who doesn't know how to behave. Someone who has allowed the greed of the lower classes to stain this place." A few students began to whisper. "Silence," Mrs. Crow shouted, making the entire class flinch. "I want all mobile phones, smartwatches, anything that can communicate with the outside put into this metal box. Right now." She picked up the metal toolbox and walked down the rows of desks. Clang, clang echoed as one expensive phone after another was tossed inside. "Miss Crow, my mother is waiting at the gate." A male student spoke up weakly. "Your mother will have to wait, Thomas." Mrs. Crow cut him off without even looking at the boy. "No one is leaving this room until my property is returned. I am giving the thief one last chance to confess before things become worse." She had collected all the phones. The door was locked. She was the law, the judge, and the executioner within these 4 walls. She placed the metal box on the teacher's desk, then slowly walked toward the back of the classroom, heading straight for Ruby. The sharp clicks of her high heels striking the wooden floor, click, 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 sounded like the countdown of a slow-burning bomb. Mrs. Crow stopped right in front of Ruby. She crossed her arms over her chest and leaned down, letting her shadow loom over the girl. "Ruby," she said, her voice sweet in a terrifying way. "Don't you feel hot? In that thick, flashy dress of yours?" Ruby looked up, her dark eyes remaining strangely calm. She wasn't trembling like the other children. Her small hand clutched the hem of her turquoise dress, not out of fear, but as if to protect something. "I don't feel hot, ma'am," Ruby replied clearly. "Really?" Mrs. Crow sneered, a smile that never reached her eyes. "But I can see you sweating. Is it because you're nervous? Or because you're hiding something? That doesn't belong to you." The entire class held its breath. Mrs. Crow's words were like poisoned arrows, not only accusing but also isolating Ruby from the group. She was using a dog whistle tactic, employing language that hinted at background and status to stir suspicion among the other children. "In this class," Mrs. Crow continued, her eyes fixed on Ruby while her voice carried to everyone, "we are all accustomed to abundance. We don't need to steal shiny things to change our lives. But there is one person, someone who is always craving a position they will never have." She leaned in closer, her carefully made-up face only inches from Ruby's. The overpowering scent of her perfume flooded the girl's nose. "Ruby, tell me," she whispered, her tone manipulative. "Your father, he's an electrician, right? He must have taught you how to dismantle things very quickly, hasn't he? Quickly enough that no one even notices." Ruby tightened her grip. "I didn't take your ring," Ruby said, her gaze steady as she looked straight at the woman oppressing her. "And my father is an honest man." "Honest?" Mrs. Crow burst out laughing, the sound echoing in the sealed room. "We'll see where that honesty is. Perhaps. It's hidden right under that expensive silk fabric, HM." She reached out, intending to touch Ruby. Ruby recoiled instinctively. "Don't touch me," Ruby said louder, her voice firm. That act of resistance was like pouring fuel on the fire. Mrs. Crow's eyes flashed with a crazed fury. She straightened up and turned to address the entire class. "Very well. If the thief will not confess, we will have to use stronger measures. No one is allowed to challenge me in my own classroom." The air in the room was taut as a drawn wire. Mrs. Crow was preparing for a brutal hunt, and her prey was sitting right in front of her, stubborn and alone. The tension in the classroom thickened, as if a single spark could make everything explode, when suddenly a series of urgent knocks shattered the suffocating atmosphere. Knock! 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 Mrs. Crow jolted. The ferocity on her face was instantly replaced by a calculating look of concern. She adjusted her collar and hurried to open the door. It swung open, revealing Principal Collins, a middle-aged man in an expensive gray suit that was slightly tight around his increasingly large waist. Sweat dotted his forehead, and his eyes darted around, not out of concern for the students' safety, but because of the inconvenience interrupting his schedule. "Miss Crow, what is going on?" Collins asked in a low but irritated voice. The noise can be heard all the way down the hallway. "Do you realize the donor delegation is in the building next door? If they hear shouting..." Mrs. Crow immediately slipped into the role of a distressed victim. She pulled Principal Collins inside, partially closing the door behind them, and lowered her voice just enough that Ruby could still overhear fragments. "Mr. Collins, I truly apologize. But we have an emergency situation. My engagement ring, it has disappeared." "Disappeared?" Collins frowned, glancing around the classroom, dim because the curtains had been drawn. "You mean you dropped it?" "No, sir. It was stolen," Mrs. Crow asserted, her eyes sharp as daggers as they flicked toward the back of the room. She leaned closer to Collins and whispered words steeped in toxic prejudice. "You know, this class has always been very pure. But today, there is a foreign element. A child unfamiliar with abundance, perhaps dazzled by things she has never seen in her life." Collins followed Crow's gaze and saw Ruby. He let out a long, weary sigh. To him, Ruby and her scholarship had always been an administrative burden, a tiresome PR effort to prove the school's diversity. "That girl again?" Collins muttered, his face full of annoyance. "Fine. I'll resolve this quickly. I don't want the police hanging around here while donors are taking their tour." He walked straight to the back of the classroom, ignoring the other frightened children, and stopped in front of Ruby's desk. He looked down at her with the air of a superior granting false mercy. "Ruby," Collins began, his tone condescending, as if speaking to a criminal already convicted. "Miss Crow says you are holding something that does not belong to you. I want to believe you truly. But you must understand your position here. Your scholarship, it is very fragile." Ruby looked up at the principal. Not a trace of fear. Not a single tear. "I did not take it, sir," Ruby replied, her voice still remarkably calm. Collins clicked his tongue and shook his head in exasperation. He hated stubbornness. To him, truth mattered less than smoothness. "Listen, Ruby," he bent down closer, his voice turning into a veiled threat. "If you foolishly swallowed it, or hid it on your person to take home and sell, then hand it over right now. I will let it go. I will not call the police. But if you continue to be obstinate like this, I'm afraid your father will receive an expulsion notice tomorrow. Do you want your father to be disappointed?" Ruby fell silent for a second, her hand still gripping the hem of her dress. Then she spoke, enunciating every word clearly. "Sir, according to Article 14, Section B of the St. Augustus School Student Handbook, the school does not have the right to search a student's body without the presence of a parent or legal guardian, unless you have a court order." Principal Collins froze. He had not expected a 10-year-old child, the daughter of an electrician, to be able to quote school regulations so precisely, a verbal slap straight across his face. His face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. He did not have time to debate school policy with a child. The donors were waiting. He straightened up, turned to Mrs. Crow, and brushed his hands as if shaking off responsibility. "You see, Miss Crow, this child is far too stubborn. And I cannot stand here all day. So you're just going to let her get away with it?" Mrs. Crow hissed, her face twisted with resentment. Collins glanced at his watch, then looked at Mrs. Crow with cold, indifferent eyes. "You are the homeroom teacher. You are responsible for maintaining order and protecting property in your classroom. I'm giving you 5 minutes. Resolve this quietly. I don't want to see the police involved, and I certainly don't want to hear any complaints from other parents." With that, he turned and hurried out the door, leaving Ruby standing alone in the middle of the room. "5 minutes, Miss Crow," he repeated before closing the door. "Do whatever you need to do, just get the ring back." Click. The door closed once more. Silence returned, heavier and far more frightening than before. Principal Collins's abandonment was no different from a written permission slip, a tacit act of complicity allowing Mrs. Crow to do whatever she pleased. Mrs. Crow turned back, the smile on her lips twisting into one of manic triumph. She looked at Ruby, her eyes stripped of any trace of a teacher's humanity. "You heard him, Ruby," she said, her whisper echoing through the still room. "The principal has given me authority. There's no one left to protect you now. No rules. No laws. No parents." She slowly walked toward the teacher's desk, where a pen holder sat. She did not take a pen. Her hand brushed past it and stopped on a cold, gleaming metal object, a large pair of paper cutting scissors. "You say you're not hiding it on your body?" Mrs. Crow lifted the scissors, the two metal blades clacking together with a chilling click, click. "Then it must be hidden somewhere in those loose layers of fabric. And I will find it no matter the cost." She moved toward Ruby, the tip of the scissors pointed at the floor, but her eyes were locked onto the beautiful emerald blue dress, the next target of her fury. When the sound of Principal Collins's footsteps faded down the hallway, the air in the classroom seemed to be sucked dry. Mrs. Crow stood still for a moment, her back to the students, her shoulders trembling slightly. Not from fear. Not from remorse. It was the trembling of rage unleashed from all moral restraint. She turned around. Her face no longer carried even a trace of the dignified authority of a veteran educator. It was raw, twisted, and filled with hatred. "Very well," Mrs. Crow hissed, her voice sharp as a shard of broken pottery cutting through the silence. "If you want to play hide and seek with me, Ruby, then we'll play it to the end. Let's see how long that innocent face lasts." She lunged toward Ruby's desk like a violent storm. Without warning, she grabbed Ruby's worn old backpack hanging beside the chair. "Don't!" Ruby cried out, her voice showing fear for the first time. "That's my personal property." "Personal?" Mrs. Crow sneered coldly. "There's no such thing as personal here when you're holding what belongs to me." With a violent motion, she flipped the backpack upside down. Bang, clatter. Books, colored pencils, an old lunchbox, and several loose sheets of paper scattered across the wooden floor. Pencils rolled in every direction. An apple rolled to a stop at the teacher's feet. Mrs. Crow kicked it aside with the tip of her high heel, then bent down and rummaged through the meager pile like a madwoman searching for gold in trash. She flipped through every book, shook out every piece of paper. Nothing. She opened the pencil case and dumped its contents out. Empty. There was no ring. Disappointment did not slow Mrs. Crow down. Instead, it poured fuel onto the fire of delusion in her mind. She straightened up, breathing heavily, her gaze lifting from the mess on the floor to Ruby, and then her eyes locked onto the dress. The emerald blue princess dress floated softly, with its delicate layered fabric. In Mrs. Crow's eyes now, it was no longer a birthday gift. It was a hiding place. A perfect stash for stolen goods. "So that's it," she muttered, slowly stepping toward Ruby, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk beside her. "I was too naive to search the backpack. A professional thief wouldn't keep evidence somewhere so obvious. You planned it all, didn't you?" 9. Ruby stepped back until her back hit the chair. She stared at Mrs. Crow with intense caution. "What are you talking about?" Ruby asked, her voice firm. "I'm not hiding anything. Don't lie." Mrs. Crow screamed, the shout making the entire class flinch. "That dress. That cheap thing pretending to be elegant. You slit the hem and stuffed it between the lining layers, didn't you? Or did you sew a secret pocket inside that puffed tulle?" "You're being ridiculous." Ruby shot back, staring straight into the teacher's madness. "It's a silk dress. You can't cut it without ruining it." "Ruining it?" Mrs. Crow burst out laughing, her laughter wild and unhinged. She moved back toward the teacher's desk once again. This time, she picked up the large metal paper scissors. She raised them high, the ceiling lights reflecting off the cold steel blades. Click! Click! The sound was dry and threatening. "To me, this rag was already trash to begin with," Mrs. Crow said, step by step forcing Ruby toward the wall. "It's an insult to aesthetics. An insult to this school. And most importantly, it's hiding my property." Ruby stood up, trying to keep her distance, but the cold wall was behind her. "What are you going to do?" Ruby asked, her eyes fixed on the scissors in Mrs. Crow's hand. "I'm going to do what should have been done from the start," Mrs. Crow replied, her voice dropping low and dangerous. "I'm going to inspect that dress. Every stitch, every seam. If you don't hand over the ring yourself, I'll take it with my own hands. And believe me, I won't be gentle. You don't have the right to destroy my dress." Ruby shouted, her arms raised to shield her chest. "My father won't let this go." The weak threat of an electrician father only deepened Mrs. Crow's contempt. "Your father?" She sneered, stepping even closer, the tip of the scissors now only inches from Ruby's chest. "What's he going to do? Fix a light bulb for me? He's nothing here. In this room, I am the law." She cornered Ruby completely. There was no escape. The other children sat frozen, some covering their mouths, eyes wide with terror at the scene unfolding. No one dared to speak. Mrs. Crow's authority was absolute, and fear had paralyzed them all. "Stand still," Mrs. Crow ordered, raising the scissors. "Don't make me use force. I only need to make one small cut. To see which little mouse is hiding inside." The metallic sound rang out again. Click. That sound severed the final thread of reason. She no longer just wanted to find the ring. She wanted to destroy the dress. She wanted to rip apart the proud facade of this poor little girl to prove that, no matter how much silk she wore, Ruby was still just a child who did not belong to her elite world. The scissors moved closer. Ruby held her breath, her back pressed tightly against the wall, her black eyes wide open, reflecting the image of a teacher turning into a monster fueled by jealousy and prejudice. "Don't touch me. You have no right," Ruby screamed, her voice echoing and tearing through the stifling silence of the room. She curled inward, both hands clutching the bodice of her dress, trying to create a fragile shield against the woman who was losing her mind in front of her. But Mrs. Crow had crossed the line of a teacher long ago. In her eyes, now, Ruby was not a terrified 10-year-old child, but an enemy that had to be destroyed, an obstacle hiding her treasure. "Right?" Mrs. Crow roared, her voice breaking, hoarse with rage. "I am the authority here. I decide what's right and wrong in this classroom. Do you think this cheap dress can protect you?" She lunged forward, her left hand the one without the ring grabbing the collar of the turquoise silk dress. Her grip was so strong that her fingers turned white, her red-painted nails digging into the delicate fabric. "Let go of me. You're hurting me." Ruby struggled, her small feet kicking hard against the wooden floor, trying to push the larger woman away. "Hurt?" Mrs. Crow laughed wildly, leaning her face close to Ruby's, her rapid breath blowing against the girl's face. "You don't know what pain is yet. Real pain is when you see your lies laid bare for everyone to see. Rip." She yanked Ruby forward by the collar and slammed her down into the chair. Ruby was pinned, unable to move. The other children in the class began to scream and cry. "Miss Crow, stop it!" a female student at the front desk shouted, covering her eyes in terror. "Shut up!" Mrs. Crow snapped back, her eyes bloodshot and merciless. "Anyone who speaks up will be expelled immediately. Sit still and watch closely. This is a lesson in honesty." Turning back to her prey, Mrs. Crow raised the paper scissors high. The ceiling lights reflected off the cold steel blades, creating a deadly flash that swept across Ruby's wide-open eyes. "Where is it?" she hissed through clenched teeth. "Which lining did you hide it in? The bodice? Or the shoulder padding? There's nothing there. I swear." Ruby sobbed, yet her eyes never left the descending tip of the scissors. "I'll shred this rag to pieces to find the evidence. Let's see how long you can keep lying." Mrs. Crow didn't wait another second. She plunged the cold tip of the scissors into the silk fabric right in front of Ruby's chest. Rip! The sound of tearing fabric shrieked through the air, painful like flesh being ripped apart. The sharp blades chewed through the finest silk, destroying the painstaking craftsmanship of the delicate seams. "No, my dress!" Ruby screamed, tears spilling out. Mrs. Crow did not stop. She was like someone drunk on blood, except what intoxicated her was destruction. She pressed down harder, slashing a long cut from the neckline all the way to the waist. Slash, slash. The sound of scissors slicing through the thick inner layers was chilling. Shards of turquoise silk fluttered down onto the floor like shredded butterfly wings. The once glorious princess dress was now nothing but tattered scraps hanging loosely from the girl's body. "Come out! Come out!" Mrs. Crow muttered repeatedly, her eyes wide as she searched for the glitter of a diamond. "You're hiding well, but you won't escape." She used her bare hands to tear apart the freshly cut fabric, violently stripping away Ruby's outer layer. She panted heavily, her chest heaving with excitement, waiting for the moment the ring would clatter onto the floor. She imagined herself picking it up, holding it high before the class, and declaring her absolute victory over this outsider. "See? I told you so. She screamed before even looking carefully, her hand groping through the empty space inside the torn bodice. But there was no clinking sound. No diamond fell out. Mrs. Crow froze. She stared at the empty space in front of Ruby's chest, where the silk had been torn apart. The hand holding the scissors began to tremble, not with rage anymore, but with an overwhelming sense of dread. She blinked, trying to search again. She shoved her hand in deeper, rummaging through the remaining scraps of fabric. Where is it? She muttered, her voice faltering. Did you swallow it? Or did you throw it somewhere? I told you. Ruby lifted her head, her face soaked with tears, but her voice was chillingly cold. I didn't take any ring. Mrs. Crow staggered back a step, the sudden emptiness making her sway. The scissors dangled limply from her hand. She looked down at the floor, where the expensive silk lay scattered like the corpse of a murdered work of art. There was no ring. Nothing at all. That's impossible. Mrs. Crow shook her head violently, denying reality. You must have hidden it. You're a thief. You. But her accusation died in her throat. Because as the turquoise silk finally fell completely away, what was revealed underneath was not a ring and not the undergarments of an ordinary child. Mrs. Crow narrowed her eyes, staring at the strange object hugging Ruby's small body. Something jet black, modern and dangerous. Before she could understand what it was, a chill ran down her spine. It felt as though she had just stepped into a bottomless pit, and darkness was preparing to swallow her whole. The turquoise silk scraps lay scattered across the wooden floor, motionless like crushed petals beneath Mrs. Crow's feet. But the teacher had no mind left to care about the destruction she had just caused. Her eyes were wide open, pupils constricted by a sight her prejudice-filled brain could not process. Beneath the shredded princess dress, Ruby was not wearing ordinary underwear. The small body of the student was snugly encased in a jet-black tactical vest, fitted tightly against her frame. The material looked modern, rigid, and completely at odds with the softness of the silk that had concealed it. Mrs. Crow stumbled back another step, her breath caught in her throat. She nearly dropped the scissors onto her own foot. What the hell is this? Mrs. Crow stammered, her trembling voice breaking the silence. What are you wearing? A bomb? Ruby did not answer. She stood straight, adjusting her posture, her arms hanging loosely at her sides, fully revealing the secret on her chest. On the vest, there were no explosives, no dangerous weapons. Instead, thin wires ran neatly along the seams, connecting to a tiny circular device positioned at the center of her chest, cleverly disguised as a large button. But Mrs. Crow recognized instantly that it was not a button. It was a high-resolution optical camera lens, pitch black and bottomless, like a third eye staring straight at her. And right beside that lens, a tiny red LED light was blinking steadily, over and over. Flash. Off. Flash. Off. Rec. Live. Mrs. Crow went rigid. The scissors slipped from her hand, the sharp tip touching the floor with a small but piercing clang. She stared at the red light, and a chill ran down her spine, spreading through her limbs. She knew what that light meant. She had seen it on video cameras, on phones when recording videos. Suddenly, a crackling sound came from a tiny speaker discreetly attached to Ruby's shoulder, shattering the terrifying silence. Crackle, crackle. Hello, 1, 2, 3. Then, a man's voice came through. It was not the timid voice of an electrician Mrs. Crow had imagined. It was a deep, cold voice, full of authority, amplified clearly through the mini-speaker so that every word could be heard by everyone in the locked room. Good morning, Mrs. Crow. Mrs. Crow jumped, looking around wildly as if searching for the source of the voice. Who's speaking? She screamed, panic beginning to overwhelm her reason. Don't look around, Mrs. Crow, the voice continued, calm but sharp as a scalpel. Look at the camera. Look at your audience. Mrs. Crow turned back to Ruby. The red light was still blinking. Flash. Off. Your father? Mrs. Crow pointed at Ruby, her voice breaking. Are you calling your father? Tell him to turn it off immediately. This is a violation of classroom rules. Oh no, Mrs. Crow, David's voice replied, this time carrying a trace of bitter sarcasm. I'm not just making a call. Do you know what you've just done? You've committed assault against a child, destruction of property, and defamation. And the most interesting part, do you know what it is? David paused for a second, letting the silence choke Mrs. Crow. You just did all of that in front of 2.3 million people watching live on Platform X. What? What? Mrs. Crow's face drained of all color. She staggered, grabbing the edge of Ruby's desk to keep from collapsing. 2 million. Precisely 2,345,102 people, and the number is increasing every second. David recited each digit clearly, like a death sentence for the teacher's career. You've just become the brightest star on social media today, Mrs. Crow. The hashtag number justice for Ruby is currently trending worldwide. No. Impossible. Mrs. Crow shook her head violently, cold sweat pouring down her face. She looked at the scissors in her hand, then at Ruby's torn dress. That image. The image of a grown woman holding scissors and attacking a child. Had it already been broadcast across the world? I was just disciplining her. Mrs. Crow tried to justify herself, speaking to the tiny camera. I suspected her of stealing. I have the right. You do not have the right. David's voice roared through the speaker, making the entire class flinch. You have no evidence. You have no search warrant. You have only prejudice and cruelty. That dress, Mrs. Crow, was a trap. I knew you wouldn't be able to tolerate my daughter shining. I knew you would look for an excuse to humiliate her. So I prepared this stage for you. Ruby, who had been silent until now, finally lifted her head. Her eyes no longer held innocence, but shone with maturity and resilience. My dad is right, ma'am, Ruby said, her voice gentle but firm. This dress is expensive, yes, but it's not as valuable as the truth. And the truth is that you've just destroyed yourself with your own hands. Mrs. Crow released the desk. She staggered back, her back hitting the blackboard. The whole world was watching her. Millions of eyes were seeing straight through her dark soul through that tiny lens. Turn it off. Turn it off now. She lunged forward, trying to grab the camera on Ruby's chest. I advise you not to do that, David's voice warned, cold and decisive. The police are right outside the door. If you touch my daughter one more time, your charges won't stop at assault. And Mrs. Crow, David's voice came again, this time low and dripping with contempt, boring into the panicked teacher's core. Stop trying to play the victim. My millions of viewers are very smart. While you were busy slashing my daughter's dress, they did something you didn't expect. They rewound the video. Mrs. Crow's eyes widened, her breath caught in her throat. Rewound? That's right. At minute 12 of the broadcast, when you had your back turned at the sink, the wide-angle camera on Ruby's outfit recorded everything through the reflection in the window glass. You never forgot the ring on the desk like you claimed. You yourself slipped it into the inside pocket of the vest you were wearing. As if struck by electricity, Mrs. Crow's right hand jerked up involuntarily, clutching the left side of her vest. Beneath the expensive fabric, a small, hard, cold object pressed against her ribs like a blade. The truth was laid bare. She hadn't lost the ring. She had never lost it. It had all been a carefully calculated performance. Mrs. Crow didn't just hate Ruby's background. She hated her very existence, an ugly crack in the perfect ceramic vessel called the upper class that she worshipped. She needed an excuse, an unforgivable charge to expel this poor child from her sanctuary forever. and theft was the perfect script. She was willing to trade the fake honor of an educator for the destruction of a 10-year-old's future. You thought that by hiding the ring and blaming the weakest person, you would win, David said, his words like a life sentence for her career. But you forgot that the light of truth shines brighter than the filthy diamond you're hiding in your pocket. Bang! The classroom door finally burst open, wooden fragments flying. The police stormed in like a flood, followed by Principal Collins, his face completely drained of color. Mrs. Crow, raise your hands and step away from the child, the police chief shouted, aiming a stun gun at her. Mrs. Crow trembled, her knees buckling. In her total panic, she accidentally pulled her hand out of her pocket. Clutched between her shaking fingers, the 3-carat diamond ring fell to the floor. Clang! The small sound echoed like a death knell. The ring lay abandoned on the wooden floor, right next to the torn silk fabric. It was not the victim of a theft, but undeniable evidence of a vile conspiracy. Before the blinking red camera on Ruby's chest, and before the disgusted eyes of all the students, Mrs. Crow understood that what had truly been shattered today was not the dress, but her entire life. The story is a costly lesson about prejudice and how human worth is measured. True class does not lie in luxurious clothing or glittering diamonds, but radiates from character and dignity. Mrs. Crow, a symbol of hollow arrogance, failed disastrously by underestimating the power of truth and the intelligence of those she deemed weak. Never use power to trample others, because when they are pushed into a corner, it is the hunter who falls into the trap. A glossy facade cannot conceal a rotten soul, and justice armed with careful preparation will always be the final light that exposes all injustice.